All right, so just kind of bumping it up another level, I want you to be aware that while this is kind of acting like a grid, right? The grids that we created were restricted to basically exactly the XY plane, right? For the most part, everything we did in the first 2 days was all XY plane and aligned to the XY coordinates. So something like this gives us the opportunity to create a bit of a warped XY grid system, right? Sort of, kind of. Um, it's not exactly the same though, because the way that basically the way that this is being broken down is that every single one of these panels, right, these subdivided individual surfaces, has 4 edges. So when it has 4 edges, that means that this line is not one line between the two. It's actually 2 lines that are over top of one another. So you just need to be aware that sometimes you're going to have to do some extra isolation in order to mitigate extra work. That's all conceptual right now. I don't expect you to understand exactly what I mean by that, but you'll see it coming up. So I just want you to be aware that this is slightly different than a grid. But it gives us some really interesting flexibility, because once I move into, say, like perspective, and you could do this or just watch, it's up to you. If I kind of create a sort of warped surface here, I'm going to hold Alt to copy this over. Move this to the side, and I'm going to loft the two of them together. Actually, let me...
Can you minimize Grasshopper so you can see better?
Yeah. So I made 2 curves that are kind of funky shaped. I'm just going to mirror them. Oops, didn't mean to do that. And then loft them so that I get a really interesting kind of warped surface. Hang on. I don't get why my view always jumps to 80 all of a sudden. Anyway, this is what I wanted. So it creates a warped surface that if I was to try and panelize this manually, I'd probably have to go through and sort of, sweep along rails and kind of create a whole bunch of surfaces that I would cut it with, and it would be kind of just ultimately a nightmare, unless you're using paneling tools, which is a different story. But so where's my grasshopper? There it is. All we have to do at this point really is basically just take that surface and re-reference it in, and then it's in the third dimension. So if I right click and I say set one surface and select this one instead, well, now I'll turn that layer off as well. There you go. Now it is automatically subdividing all of those panels in all dimensions. Okay, so it's a pretty powerful tool. It's super basic. There are plugins that do this kind of stuff too, but they don't quite take it as far as we're going to. Okay.
They're equal spaces?
That's a good question, and no, they're not. So the way that this defines it is it basically takes your outer domain boundary and it equally spaces that. So if the curve on one end is longer than the curve on another end, then you're going to have different spacing. It also, if you notice, the one on the end here is longer than, say, the one in the middle, and that's because the u and v coordinates are trying to cross at a perpendicular angle at all times. So if I have a surface that's sort of warping out like that, basically I'm going to have one line that kind of curves up that way, and as this line, right, so it'll be equal along the edge, but as this line comes out, it's going to bend to try its best to create a perpendicular angle right here. It won't be able to do it in all cases, but it's going to give you some warping. And so that's why sometimes it'll pull this out in order to accommodate. Does that make any sense? I'm sure there are a lot more mathematics behind it, but that's generally the way that I've experienced it behaving, if that counts for anything. So, yes. So we got to the point of deconstructing yesterday, and I want to move into kind of replicating that here today. So everything we learned in our two-dimensional patterning exercise, we can now use in a three-dimensional patterning exercise. So if I'm going to isolate something, all I have to do is go to surface and analysis, and then take in a deconstruct brep. And then when you plug that in, you'll see that you have faces in groups of 1, and you have edges in groups of 4, and you have vertices in groups of 4. Any questions on this so far? Okay. So I'm going to stop this video here, and I'm going to introduce sort of another abstract term, and then we're going to kind of blend the two before I move into normals. So just hang tight for a moment.